But my name is Taryn Massaros. I am the esports manager at STS Education. And we'll tell you a little bit more about STS Education later, just so you understand kind of where we're coming from. But I have been working with schools for just about 15 years, implementing programs. I started off in the tutoring industry, oddly enough. And during my time there, I watched many students matriculate into incredible colleges, even start incredible careers. And then I learned about esports, and I learned about everything that was happening in esports and how esports is just another way for students to matriculate into college. And with my work with schools and implementing SAT and ACT programs in schools, I realized that esports could do so much more. And here I am a year and a half later, helping schools all over the world implement esports into their programs. I feel like the joke I always make is that this was the only way for me to stay in the family business. Both of my sisters are classroom teachers. Most recently, they actually both left the classroom and went to the gym and became PE teachers, which is their lifelong dream. My mom works in our home office here in the Board of Education locally in Connecticut, as does my father. And my uncle is actually a superintendent here in Connecticut as well. So I like to just joke that, it's the family business, and this is the only way that I could have stayed in the family business, was to help schools implement programs kind of outside of the classroom. With me is my colleague, Fran Irwin, and I'm going to let him introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. I had turned on mute just because I use my desktop speakers and mic, and sometimes there's some weird feedback. So the reason I'm here is I'm actually very into esports also. I actually work in the marketing department at STS, and I'm hoping to hear some good conversation today. If I don't, that's okay. At least I'll listen. That's why we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? Listen twice as much as you talk. And so what qualifies me to be here is I was originally a classroom teacher right out of school back at the turn of the century. Feels like forever ago, but I taught school in Detroit for 5 years. Then I moved to California. I worked in some wonderful outdoor ed programs here, as well as a children's science museum in Orange County called the Discovery Science Center. And I've just recently got back into working with educational consulting as a full-time employee of STS, actually. In that interim time, I spent 5 years coaching and 2 years refereeing AYSO youth soccer for my daughter from the time she was 7 until she was 15. And now she doesn't like soccer anymore. She likes video games. So this is a particular interest to me. I got out of coaching, and I've always liked gaming a lot too. I started with the original NES at my cousin's house in 1984. And when I was teaching as a classroom teacher, I was always looking for teachable moments. I'd be watching something on Discovery Channel or Mythbusters or something, and it would relate so well to something I was talking about in the classroom. But 20 years ago, esports wasn't considered as a serious thing. You could barely hook your Xbox up to the internet. And so the idea of using esports to advance curriculum and bring students in that might not function as well in a traditional educational setting is really appealing to me. I think that you can reach kids through esports in ways that you wouldn't be able to through traditional classroom instruction, and there's a lot more openings here than you might think. Once you get past thinking of video games as Street Fighter 2 or Battlefield, and start thinking about them as Age of Empires or Rocket League or something like that. So it doesn't always have to be a violent gore fest. It can be about teamwork and promotion. And so I'm here to help Taryn get that across.
Yeah, and our goal here today is to kind of talk a little bit about what other schools are doing all across the country. We've spoken with hundreds of schools and helped some of those schools implement their esports programs. And so just talk about the ways that schools are implementing, some of the challenges that they're seeing. Our goal today is that you walk away with some actionable steps if you're at that point, or just the step of creating a vision and helping you with the starting point of creating a vision for your esports program. So with that goal, I'm going to let Fran go ahead and take it away.
Like I said, I used to be a classroom teacher, and I'm used to kind of talking fast so people stay awake. I taught middle school and early high school, and those kids can tune out. So if you have a question, please raise your hand or type it in the chat, and I'll try to answer it. this might be a lot more fruitful for everyone if we get some discussion going. And if you don't want to, that's okay. I definitely understand that as well. So why esports? And there's three big statistics that we always pump. I'm going to bring up my speaker notes over here because I don't have them memorized, but I do think they're important. So we have our talking points here, right? They're a gateway into technology-related science, technology, education, and math skills. So they're, STEM, SEL, CTE are these buzzwords, but honestly, they're not just buzzwords when you're talking about esports, because they really, the idea of learning to play a game sometimes will drive someone to figure out more about how the game works, but not just from a player perspective. They want to know how it was programmed. Why does this person have a quarter-second advantage over me every single time? Causes you to dig into what's behind it. And the people who are building video games now are the people that were me in 1984. They had a computer, they were writing out 10 hello world, 20 go to 10, driving their parents crazy with looping code on their screen. And it's the same thing now. They could be interested in anything from the functioning of the peripherals they use to how to build the machines they play on. And when we talk about science, technology, arts, and math, we're talking about kids, there's a lot of influencers out there that have made an alternative career. College is not for everyone. And so this kind of thing can be a gateway into video production, into audio production, into editing, into a real solid career with real solid transferable skills that are wanted in the marketplace, right? So first of all, it's a gateway to that. Second of all, it's been proven that just like an athletic sports team, you can make kids come to school if they want to participate in esports, up to a 10% in attendance improvement when people have implemented esports programs. And also going along with that is a GPA rise of up to 1.7, like, from a 0.5 to like a 2.2, because kids who otherwise might not want to go to school, or kids who might not have the hardware at home to be able to play these games that they'll be able to offer them at school, will come to school because they want to participate in this activity. As I mentioned, my daughter doesn't like soccer anymore. She likes drama and video games now. And so part of the reason we entice her to participate in school is if you want to be on the cast of the play, you have to maintain a certain GPA. And so this is another inroad with kids who may not care about traditional activities. If someone spends all their time gaming, why not let them get some academic credit for it as well? And there really are legitimate inroads to that also. So I talked a lot, but I don't see any questions. So Taryn, if you want to advance the slide. Okay, so esports is a window into all these things, as I talked about before, right? It's a window into media analysis. Why are things presented in video games the way they are? There's controversial things that happen all the time, and rather than just saying, ooh, that's controversial, I want to plunk down my $60 to find out what everybody else is finding out, why not teach kids to do critical media analysis of how the villain is presented, how the hero is presented, what it's like to play from a first person versus a third person perspective? There's all these teachable moments that you can bring into this. I already talked a little bit about the STEM aspect, and then the college prep aspect. I mean, if you have an esports team that has 24 kids, it's going to need organization. We know from internally organizing tournaments, kids need jerseys, they need water bottles, they need headsets and mice, they need transportation to and from. Someone needs to run the equipment that's doing the podcast, right? There's a place for everybody who wants to get involved with this stuff. And if you think about it traditionally, like, the AV club who brings the VCR around on the cart or whatever for team movie day, it doesn't have to be that anymore. They can get involved like to any aspect that they want to. The social emotional learning, in particular, I think there's a curriculum-based part of social emotional learning where you can team up someone who's good at history and you can team up someone who's good at games, and they can play off each other. The history one learns to play the game better, the gamer learns the history better. There's a lot of opportunities to let people contribute in a social emotional way that that they're not that traditional education doesn't allow for. And I will admit that's a new term for me, social emotional learning. Even back in 99 to 2004 when I was teaching, it was more about how do we manage these 38 kids, but if you can do social emotional learning, I think this is a great way into it. And as I talked about with CTE, career and technical education, even if you have a kid who's very artistic and they want to sculpt a little team mascot so they can print it out to sell for hype at a show or a pep rally or something like that. There's all these inroads that esports, academic esports can provide, that to the point where I was inspired when I first started at SCS. I wrote a full, quarter-long curriculum where you learned about it in English, you learned about it in math, you learned about it in history, and it's all tied back to this game and tied into this huge tournament. And if you have someone who's enthusiastic about this stuff, I really think there's a lot of ways to connect it to real forms of learning. And you don't even have to try to hide it. The kids realize that you're trying to teach them, and it's okay because they still get to play the game. So it's all good that way. Okay, you want to advance it again for me, please, Taryn?
Yeah, no, I think that you did an incredible job of really setting the stage, Fran. And I would be surprised if many of the attendees on tonight don't already know, why esports, right? I think it's really important to still reiterate it over and over again. I'm not an educator by trade, but both of my sisters are. And of course, I work with many, many educators across my career, people like Fran too, here on the professional side of things now. And I just know that everything that you guys do as educators are always for your students, right? The core of everything that you do is because of your students. So with that, I want to kind of jump into the core of what we really want to talk about tonight, and it's the implementation options for esports. And I think that this is really where a lot of schools get held up in terms of like, well, where do we start and what do we do and how do we even start an esports program? Because that could really be the biggest burden, on schools and how they operate. So the way that what we've learned from schools as we've interviewed and worked with hundreds of schools about esports and how they're implementing esports is that there's really three silos that we've seen esports be implemented into schools. And that's play, learn, win, as you see here. And that's a traditional type of club. I mean, think about this even like a chess club or a board game club, any type of after school extracurricular activity, right? It really hits just the community aspect of everything. It allows students to be part of a club, maybe after school, stay after school, gives them a safe space. It gives them a collaborative space to really be and play these video games and to collaborate, like Fran said, in many different ways. The learn side of things really goes to, I think, what the core reasoning behind a lot of schools, intentions for implementing esports is, and it's using those esports aspects to align with pathways and to create curriculum and all of that. Right up front, I'm going to tell you that we've definitely identified with many of our partners that this learn aspect is probably one of the most challenging ways to implement esports, and we'll get into that a little bit later why. But it is a silo that a lot of schools are pursuing, and it certainly is a silo that is an acceptable way of implementing esports. Go ahead, Fran.
Just to throw in my 2 cents on that, while I was a classroom teacher, I went back and I got my master's in curriculum design. And if I had esports to design curriculum around, 20 years ago, and I'd been the first one to market with it, I like to think they'd be running Fran's esports curriculum right now. Just because you can actually teach a class in it. I think I mentioned before that I worked at a children's museum here where we ran summer science camp programs. And we did a video game design program, we did a robotics program with Lego Robotics, and we did a digital photography program. And it's all couched in, yeah, let's go take a fun picture and then play with these filters. But the kids are so intensely into it, and especially the video game design one. I wish that esports had been a thing back when I was doing that, just because, and I know I'm spouting off about it. I mean, I'm in marketing, I have to a little bit, right? But I really think that it just provides so many teachable moments that you can tie to really almost anything. And not to mention that if you're able to talk about stuff in a context that the kids appreciate, they just absorb it so much better. When I was a teacher, I really liked the WWE, and it was just such a great way to connect with sixth graders that before you know it, they're listening to you about particle physics when they started talking to you about The Rock. And that's kind of what we got going on here. So.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It certainly does align, and kids are learning and students are learning before they even know it. Different things for sure. And then, of course, the last kind of silo that we see a lot of schools implementing esports into the way is win, and that this is your traditional type of esports, the competitive type of esports that you may think about when you think about esports, or that you may see, some of the other schools that you may be looking onto implementing this way. And this is that kind of traditional esports, like a varsity type of esports program. Think of it as though it's like a traditional type of sport. And in California, I'm sure many of you have heard that the CIF did sanction esports through NASIF. They're using the organization NASIF, so the North American Scholastic Esports Federation. So a lot of schools in California specifically are taking the route of going this win silo because they have the support from CIF and NASIF specifically.
Taryn,
So with that,
I know
go ahead.
there's a lot of I know there's a lot of colleges and universities with esports teams now. Do we know yet if there's scholarships available for that? Because if there aren't, it's only a matter of time.
Absolutely. So, students can receive scholarships to attend colleges. There's a handful of them I know. I know it's growing every single day where kids are being recruited directly out of high school to collegiate esports on full rides, on partial scholarships. Division III, obviously, they can, kind of pull some strings for academic scholarships or merit scholarships, things along those lines. So it's absolutely something that that's happening, and it's the real thing. Just like you would a traditional type of sport, basketball, football, these kids are being recruited. My sister was actually a college recruited volleyball player, full ride to Bryant University in Rhode Island. That's happening for esports right now, and it's a really, really cool thing to see. So diving into a couple of things, we try to keep this deck short because esports is so heavy, but I do think that it's important to kind of lay it all out in terms of all the different things that you have to think about when implementing an esports program. So not just thinking about which way you're going to, which silo you're going to choose, right? I'm using that word today to just kind of describe that learn, play, win kind of concept. But, also all of the different things you have to think about once you decide maybe which way you're going to implement esports. And I think that all of those ways, right, whether you decide to go a club route or a curriculum route or a traditional maybe varsity esports route, you have to think about all of these things as well. So vision, equipment, challenges. I'd be curious too, if everyone, in the room today, if you are implementing an esports program, if you are seeing any of these things. So again, feel free to use the chat or come off mute and pipe in. But the first thing that we always tell schools as we're communicating with them, or if they come to us, is what's your vision? We want to understand, like, what's the big idea? We were working with a school down in Texas. I like to joke everything's bigger in Texas, and it wasn't. I wasn't wrong for this school either. When we asked them what their vision was, they immediately went to the esports space, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But their vision for their esports space was like a Houston control center. They wanted a video panel, a video wall. So we really try and kind of chop that down and figure out, how we can make that happen and how we can make this vision come to life. But first and foremost, I think, going back to what I said before about just you all being educators, right? The student interest is going to be the most important thing. I have no doubt that if you put it out there, that you would see that there was student interest almost immediately. We worked with a school down in North Carolina where they just mentioned esports, and they actually had a kid who started coming to school, where his attendance increased so much, and he was so enthusiastic about going to school that his mom actually called the school and said, "What did you guys do? What changed? Because my son's getting up without me having to drag him out of bed every day." And they said, "We think it's just because we mentioned that we're going to be doing esports."
So we did have a question in the chat, Taryn, and I'll just read it
Sure.
out loud for everyone. The student interest is definitely there, and I know you're going to get to this, but I wanted to bring it out anyway. But no idea what equipment to start with. I'm not a gamer, and I have no idea where to start. So my feeling is that if you leave it up to the kids, we all need a $7,000 computer, So we can definitely help with that, and I'll let Taryn talk a little bit about how.
Yeah, for sure, Don. And I think that this is the exact purpose of us being here, right? And for someone like us here at STS to, be helping schools, because I mean, you definitely want to gauge student interest. And I always tell schools too, you can absolutely have student interest. And let's talk about titles real quick for a moment too, right? Like you can say to the students, what titles are you playing? So titles in esports are just basically the games. And they're going to say, we're playing these 4 or 5 titles. Some of them may not be school friendly, depending on your district or your specific community, something along those lines. We've seen schools that, they've had kind of an open forum. They're allowed to play kind of whatever, just based on where they're located and their district policies. We've had other schools where their policies are very slim. And I always tell schools that if you build it, they will come, regardless of whether you're playing Rocket League or Valorant or something else. They want that community. They thrive in that community. And as Fran, mentioned a couple of times earlier too, there's all of these adjacent things that students want to come to, whether it's, game design or shoutcasting is a huge thing that, is becoming more and more popular on a daily basis in esports right now. So, I think understanding the student interest, understanding the titles that they want to play, but also knowing that you don't need to start with 10 different titles, right? Whether the titles are driven by the league, or the titles are driven by student interest, or the titles are driven by what's allowable within your district, starting with 1, 2, or even 3 titles is totally acceptable. And when schools have no idea where to start, I say Rocket League. Rocket League is friendly for not just high school, but it's also middle school friendly. Rocket League is also played in college, so the collegiate scholarships and opportunities are there. Rocket League is also in the pro sector, so it really spans a lot when it comes to esports. That one title. So if you have no idea where to start, Rocket League is really, really safe.
Christine, and Don, we'll get to your question about equipment for sure, but Christine, there are also other games like dodgeball-based games. I cannot believe the title is escaping me right now, but EA has a dodgeball-based game with no violence beyond dodgeball, which we all played at gym. So there's things like Hearthstone, which are card-based games. There's bloodless strategy games. There's games like Civilization, where you reenact the whole beginning of the world on a competitive basis. So there are definitely options for non-violent games. And like Taryn said, Rocket League is a really good place to enter because it doesn't have super high equipment requirements, and you can play it with a controller. It's not a very complicated control scheme. So there's definitely options out there. No, not Rumble versus something City. I can't remember. As soon as I get off mic, I'm going to go look because it's going to drive me crazy not to know. And then the third question I see in here about if you only have 3 switches, can middle schoolers compete with high schoolers? Yes, middle schoolers can compete with high schoolers. We've seen setups where there's 12 kids in a room and the coach has a smart board they're illustrating on, teaching them different tactics and how to play things. And so it's really a matter of, like Taryn said, what's acceptable and what you're willing to commit to. So we'll get to that hardware question in a second, because like I said, if you give it to the kids, they'll want only the best, and we can definitely provide only the best. But there's a common misconception that, like, well, you got to have a gaming computer, and that's going to be super expensive, which is a barrier to entry. And so we'll get to the equipment in a second. But Taryn, do you want to? I'm going to go look at Game Up while I
Yeah,
while
go for
I
it,
finish the
Fran.
vision.
I have a quick
Very
question about
important. Yeah, go ahead,
Hearthstone.
Justin. Yep, go ahead.
So I'm a pretty avid, or I was once an avid Hearthstone player. I'm a very avid Magic the Gathering player. I was a former pro, and now I'm a teacher. So my concern about Hearthstone would be their ability to gain cards. Does Blizzard have a system where they provide X amount of like card pool base that they can build from that's somewhat fair, or do they have to build their collection through grinding?
That's a very valid concern. And so what Justin is pointing out here is that these games are commercial enterprises. And so you do have to find a balance between, you don't want to find a game that's going to be pay to win, where the kids have to sink or your program has to sink a whole bunch of money into stuff. And Justin, I only mentioned Hearthstone as an example of a non-violent one. For example, I'm playing Marvel Snap right now on my phone. It's completely free to play if you want to play it. You get points whether you win or whether you lose. So there's always a game you can find. You know, I wouldn't recommend middle schoolers play the card game from Gwent, you know what I mean? Just because there's a lot of stuff in there that's inappropriate. But there's stuff at all levels. And I think Taryn had a really good point about chess. We're really just upscaling chess here, you know what I mean? So, but Justin, that is a really good, if someone's taking notes out there, that is a really good consideration. You don't want to choose a game where spending more money gives you an advantage. Also, the name of that game is Knockout City. The one on EA, the dodgeball game, is called Knockout City.
Yep. And that is very popular in esports right now. And you know, I mean, we could continue to name games all night long, and I would encourage you,
Smash is another very popular game named in the chat.
Yep. So, you know, figure out the student interest, and we have a student survey. If you're interested, you're more than welcome to reach out. It's basically just a Google form, and you can copy it. You can make it your own. It's out there for all of you for free. We put it together, and you know, you can use it just to kind of gauge student interest. The other thing too is that once you kind of decide the type of league play, you know, that you want to play in, whether that's a smaller league. I know that there's actually a couple of I think Dr. Richard Woodruff is actually speaking right now at the same time, but he is the commissioner of the CCEL. So there's smaller little leagues that you can play in. And then of course, there's the bigger leagues too, that you can play in through NASIF, through CIF, and they'll actually kind of dictate which games are available for the different seasons. So for example, chess is actually a title that you can play during an esports season. And then of course, Rocket League is always the most important. So don't feel like you're on your own choosing the games and that you have all of these thousands of games to choose from or whatever it may be, because you may be siloed into a specific limit of games based on either the league that you want to play in or the competition that you want to be part of, something along those lines. Or of course, if you're going middle school, high school, or even elementary school, we're seeing a lot of elementary schools kind of kick off esports with Minecraft EDU. So something that's a little bit more safe, that can be played on Chromebooks, different things along those lines. So I certainly don't want to get stuck too much on titles, because esports is definitely bigger. But I would say if you feel like that's kind of the challenging point where you're at right now, you don't know which games to play or, you know, how to gauge student interest, reach out. Our survey will absolutely 100% help you solve that issue. And it's something that I'm more than willing to share with you. If Fran wants, you can throw your email in chat too, Fran, and maybe mine. So that way you guys can reach out. The other thing to think about.
I did want to say, Chris, we keep cutting each other off. We're like too enthusiastic about this, Taryn. Christine said she'd like to know how to generate competition here. One of the things I do in my spare time is I play competitive pinball, and I know how cheesy that sounds, but I'm telling you, a corny like $5 trophy will get people out to an event, a competition like you would not believe, because money you can get, points you can get, but that trophy is hard to get, and so it's always a good way to gin up interest. All right, back to you.
Yep, for sure. And so think about timelines. What some people may not realize as you're kind of kicking off esports, I like to say sometimes that like esports is the wild, wild west. There's really no right way to do it. There's no wrong way to do it. You can really kind of, that's all we talk about, vision and school specific vision. But there is a little bit of structure, because there are 2 seasons, kind of like traditional sports. Well, I guess traditional sports technically has 3 seasons, but like traditional sports, there are seasons in esports. So your timeline should in some capacity maybe align with that, if you'd like to either have a competitive varsity type of esports, or if you have like a club type of esports. If you're going the curriculum route, you may have a little bit different of a timeline, and that's perfectly okay. It's going to be different for all of you. It also may be based on your budget season. It also may be based on your school calendar year. So timelines are going to differ completely based on every single school. Talked a little bit about league play. League play will dictate a lot. Timeline, it will dictate titles. It can also dictate, kind of the equipment that you may need. And again, we'll talk about equipment. I know there's been some questions there. Also, a lot of what we see too with schools is the physical space is a challenge, right? So a lot of schools don't have a dedicated space to dedicate to esports. So we've seen schools, I've actually built out an esports closet where we built a Rocket League team, 3 devices in kind of an old janitor's closet that was off of one of the CTE rooms. So we can work with really any space, or, we are working with a school in SoCal where they're really interested because they don't have space. They're maxed out at their capacity. So we are working with them to kind of build out a mobile esports where we're going to be using mobile carts with laptops, to actually be able to have them bring the space to whichever middle school they're going to be able to be competing at. So, physical space is definitely something to consider, but it's not a necessity. I think at the end of the day, getting your esports program up and running, whether that's with consoles, with, just the idea of esports and just creating that community is going to garner support, and you're going to see it grow just organically. So I
Christine,
do want, go ahead.
something I could suggest, like if you're wondering about what kind of space you're going to need for this, what kind of equipment you're going to need for this, if you go on Eventbrite and look up like, Super Smash Brothers tournament, there is probably a bar or a barcade or something like that within 20 miles of you that is hosting one. And you can get an idea about, it's going to be like 60 people hooting and hollering, and they're going to watch it they're going to want to watch it on a screen that they can see, and do you know what I mean? Someone's going to want to stream it on Twitch, and so there are some considerations there beyond just, we can just throw a couple computers in a room. It's actually really, really cool when it gets going. I've seen 200 people rooting for two guys playing Super Smash Brothers against each other, and it's a lot of fun for everybody.
Yeah. And I also want to say too, don't overthink it, right? I think that these students are just really looking for a safe place, a community to be part of. And I mean, we literally set up folding chairs at a school with kind of exactly what you have, Justin, where it's like 3 switches, right? And they literally, like, just the spectators that came and watched, these kids play, and it was that small team playing against each other. They were actually playing kind of interscholastically because they didn't have the network to kind of go externally, which is a whole nother challenge that we'll talk about too if we have time.
Yeah, intramural esports, we can do that too. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So, I think just creating the community and getting it kicked off and getting it going. Don't let everything that has to happen and everything that you need for esports kind of be the barrier to entry. I would say do what you can to just create that environment, and it will grow organically. So I want to talk real quick about equipment, and then, Justin, I saw that you put another question in the chat. I love it. I want to answer them all, but I want to talk about equipment because I do think that this is one of the biggest challenges that a lot of schools see, and that schools feel like, well, we don't have the equipment, so we can't get started. I've worked with schools where they literally had students bring in their own switches. This may or may not be an option for your school, right? Depending on kind of the policies around students bringing in, kind of devices or whatever it may be. But, think about it that way. Think about it in that capacity. Obviously, over COVID, and this actually did continue in one of our schools in Oregon because they were super rural, but they had the students actually going home and playing. They all played at a set time so that it was their esports program, but they would go on and they would practice, and the coaches would be on a program like Discord or a streaming program so that they could all, be part of this community. I think it's more about creating the community, whether you have the perfect space or the amount of equipment. Gaming computers are certainly the way to go. It future-proofs the program for you. You can upgrade them, especially if they're towers. Laptops are also an option. Of course, the accessories bundle, which you can find very affordable nowadays. So the headsets, the mice, the keyboards, even the mouse pads to kind of, make it a little bit more of a gamey type of environment. However, we do see that a very low barrier to entry is consoles. Now, consoles are difficult to get through a reseller like STS. We can get things like Xboxes and things along those lines. Switches you certainly can get. You just talk to your district about how they buy, whether it's through Walmart or Amazon, or I think I've heard a lot of success around bestbuy.gov. But you're able to really start at a really low barrier to entry there with switches and consoles. Again, just by setting them up and having kids kind of coming to start play after school, or finding a league that may participate in those types of titles as well.
I wanted to mention, Tara, just in the last quarter, Google has started putting out Chromebooks that can play games as well. They're not going to do as well as a desktop with like a monster graphics card, but there are $200 Chromebooks on the market that, were you so inclined, were that the limit of your budget, you could build a team around a model of machine like that as well.
Yeah, you definitely have options. You certainly have options. And then of course, esports furniture. So if we have, schools that do come to us where they have a budget or they have extra money that they've received, whether it's ESSER or Title I, or, even schools who may be implementing through Perkins because it's aligned with CTE, kind of what Fran spoke to at the very beginning of our session, where they have these funds to spend. So they do want to deck out an entire room, or they have the space, right? Lucky them. I know not all schools are that lucky to kind of have both the funds and the space to be able to do so. But there, there is the esports furniture. Now, I always like to talk about the furniture a little bit because I do think that it's important, right? Yes, you can throw some desks and chairs into a room and you can make it esportsy and you can create the environment if that's what you have to do, absolutely. But if you're going to go all out and you have the budget and you have the space, think about esports, especially if you're going to be going the varsity esports route, and the furniture like it's the equipment, right? So for example, the analogy that I use is the football team. Let's say you're going between two helmets for the football team, right? And you're saying, well, should we go with the cheaper helmet or the more expensive helmet that kind of has guarantees around safety and things along those lines? It's the same thing with like an esports chair, right? Esports chair nowadays, especially with K-12, they're rated for ergonomics, they're rated for height, they're rated to keep these students safe and healthy, to help with back posture, different things like that. So think about the furniture in that capacity. So if you are creating an esports space and you have the capacity and the funds to be able to do that, the furniture is certainly something to think about as you're thinking kind of big picture with everything. I want to pause there and see if there's any other questions that we didn't answer in the chat, or if anyone has any questions, you're welcome to come off mute too and ask them.
Yeah, I think the questions we're getting are great. They're exactly what I was hoping for. So.
All right, so I want to talk a little bit then about kind of challenges, and a lot of this is going to be the misconceptions that you hear in gaming. I've worked with plenty of schools and I've talked to plenty of schools, where they do hit roadblocks and barriers to not be able to get their gaming programs off the ground, their esports programs off the ground because of some of these things. So of course there's misconceptions about gaming, right? We always joke that it's kind of the guy in or the gamer in your mom's basement or at home with like the cheesy, Dorito fingers and the Diet Coke or the Diet Dr. Pepper, whatever it may be. And that's really not it. Like I actually joke with my mom. I'm like, Mom, you play Candy Crush. You're a gamer, right? Like she's gaming, like, she's doing those types of things. So there's certainly misconceptions about gaming around, bullying and all of that kind of stuff. And we'll address bullying here in a little bit too, because there are certainly resources that we have.
Taryn, I don't mean to cut you off, but I do want to mention that a big advantage of esports is that it's an equalizer. You don't know who's on the other side of that game. My daughter, who's 15 and is this total shrinking violeted person, gets on Fortnite with her buddies who happen to be dudes that are seniors, and she's a sophomore. And it's like every 5 seconds you gotta, hey, whoa, watch it, and that's something that's an adult needs to be trained to coach on, which is something that Taryn will talk about. But this really can be an equalizer for someone who doesn't want to stand up to someone else in person. Through the lens of gaming, everybody is really on the same footing because all that matters is how well you play. It doesn't matter how you look or if you're rich or poor, it's just how you play. Sorry,
Yep.
Taryn, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I wanted to say that.
No, I appreciate the cutoff. I think that's very important. And that's exactly to the point why this is a misconception, right? Those misconceptions are they're false. It's not at all what gaming is, specifically, esports in schools. It's bringing a lot more to the surface, and it's a positive experience versus kind of a negative experience. Of course, budget, where are you going to get the money and the funds for these gaming computers, for these consoles, different things like that? There's certainly resources out there where, we can talk about funding, or we can kind of help you find the budget to be able to do so. Or if you have an existing budget or no budget at all, we can work with you to get creative, to get consoles or to figure out ways to be able to just get started, like I've been saying. We experienced staff and coaches. So this is actually something, I know there's been a ton of turnover in K-12 and EDU, and I've experienced it even myself, right? If you were on at the very beginning, when I introduced myself, both of my sisters were classroom teachers. Now they both have left the classroom, technically, but they are now in the gym, so they become PE teachers. But I know that there's a lot of people who have left education totally. So having even gamers who are experienced, or investing in an experienced staff teacher to even train them to be a coach or to train to do kind of the professional development to be able to run an esports program. If they leave, right, that whole program may leave with them. So we do have partners, one specifically that actually down out of Dallas, Texas, who came from the pro sector, and they actually coach. They come in and they coach either remotely, or they will coach teachers to be coaches, or they will coach coaches, so traditional coaches, to be able to coach games and actually play those games and different things along those lines. We're actually working with a school in Southern California right now where we have 2 college collegiate gamers that Zoom in and coach their Valorant and Overwatch teams. And I'm happy to say that the Overwatch team is going to the finals. So we just got renewed for that contract because their coach is amazing, even though it's via Zoom. So there are options that, you know, you have if you are kind of experiencing staffing shortages, or maybe not staff interest in gaming specifically, or anything along those lines.
I would be willing to bet that most K-12 schools have a few teachers on staff that spend a lot of time gaming, just because it's not taboo like it used to be. Do you know what I mean? It really is a social activity. It's not, you know, this gnarled guy in his office hunched over the keyboard.
Yep.
Just me. That it only is when I play, but okay, Taryn.
No, and I think what we see too, when you put out that student interest survey, right? Obviously your staff sees it as well, or like the buzz of the students, you know, talking about esports as well. You'll see people kind of come out of the woodwork and be like, oh, I'll do esports, I'll do esports. And then of course you also have your administrative and community concerns. Community being a lot of parents, right? Like we always hear from schools that the parents are asking like, well, why would my kid stay at school in front of a computer and game versus, you know, just coming home and being home after school and gaming on their computer or their console here at home. And of course, that goes back to basically everything Fran talked about, you know, at the very beginning of this session, is those SEL skills. It's the leadership that they learn, the camaraderie, the team environment, right? It's keeping them kind of on campus. It's aligning their participation in a program like this to their academic performance, which also enhances their GPAs and things along those lines. So there's a lot of different things that can be said that can really help you navigate either administrative or community concerns as you move forward, if you're not an administrator yourself and kind of in that decision-making power. But we do see that a lot, that the stakeholders that are coming to us are kind of these champions for esports, and they have a couple of levels to go up to be able to convince a lot of their administrators why esports is important to bring to their school community. It's better to purchase a physical copy of the game or download. For example, Madden, would it be better to buy the disc or to download? So this is challenging because it really depends on kind of what you have in terms of whether it's the console or the gaming PC. Most of the time, what we see is schools will be buying the digital versions. What you don't know and what goes into it, kind of a lot of the time, once you do implement an esports program, there's a lot of updates that come along with it. The games are constantly being updated because of you know, the visuals and the graphics and just kind of how fast-paced esports really is. And I say it all the time, I may have already said it here on this session, but esports and K-12 is a marriage of a square peg in a round hole, right? Like that, it's the epitome of it, because it really is not meant to kind of work together. They're 2 very, very, very different things that we're marrying kind of with duct tape in a way. And, you know, once you also get kind of to the point, and, you know, this is all kind of all preliminary things to think about to even just starting a gaming program or an esports program. And then kind of once you get into all of that, you do have to think about things like the IT and talking with the IT department and getting ports opened and different things along those lines. So to the question of physical copies versus the downloadable ones, I would say 90%, if not more than that, of the schools that we work with, they do the downloadable ones, because they're updating kind of every Thursday. They do it kind of overnight, where their IT department can set it up to do that automatically so that there's no lag.
Honestly, nowadays, when you buy the physical package, a lot of times the game is too big to even fit on the disc, and so it's just a code to download it from the retailer, from Steam, or from something like that. So yeah, I mean, everything is really moving to the cloud. I think there's always going to be that concern about, well, what happens if you know, Nintendo decides I don't own those games in the cloud anymore? And yeah, that's a concern, but it's the same concern with your music, with your movies. Personally, I bought a new gaming machine last year, and it doesn't even have a hard drive in it, just because there's nothing I need to physically load that I can't download from somewhere. Sorry, did I cut someone off? I didn't. I thought I heard a voice or something. I didn't want to have cut someone off.
Yeah, I was just asking which one was cheaper, but you kind of trumped it with just basically laying out that the downloads are just going to be better at the end of the day.
Yeah, and there's sites like, and I'll just throw this out there. There's a site I use called isthereanydeal.com, and it tracks all the sites that sell digital downloads and emails you when things hit certain thresholds. And so, and you can even buy licenses for games in bulk a lot of times. And so, you know, you could, I remember a time when you could go into a Costco and buy 10 licenses for Battlefield with an educational license, just like you could buy like Microsoft Office or something like that. So there are ways to get this stuff that where you don't have to pay full price for it. And I mean, who wants to manage the boxes and manuals and stuff anyway? You can just look it up on your phone, in my opinion.
I'd be afraid they'd come up missing or something stupid like that, you know.
Right. Another physical asset to manage, right? Like, who needs that?
Yeah. And just going back to kind of the league play, right? So if you do choose to participate in a specific league, especially if it's an established league like NASIF or something along those lines, a lot of the times your student fee for that league, you'll get the game title along with that. So it all kind of depends. Like, I know that a lot of what I've said has gone back to, well, it depends on the way that you plan to implement and things along those lines, but league play, and if you choose to participate in a league, will definitely cover the cost if there is a cost for that league play.
Taryn, I did link to NASIF in the chat just because I think there's a lot of really excellent resources there. Just how to have a conversation with other administrators, how to have a conversation with parents, code of conduct, stuff like that. So you can start thinking about, like Taryn has said a million times, you can't just put a couple of kids who like games and a computer in a room. If you want to see an academic ROI and you want to get buy-in from the people with the checkbooks, you have to do a little bit more planning.
Yep. I will leave this here, and actually I want to go back one slide. So in the top right hand corner, I'll leave this up, but this QR code actually links to our esports assessment. So we'll go over basically everything that's on this slide right here. We'll ask you all questions about, do you have student interest, do you have titles in mind, what's your timeline, are you interested in league play, how are you interested in implementing? So if you're curious or kind of want to, you know, a rundown of exactly where you stand, go ahead and scan that QR code, and that will pop you right into our esports assessment. You can fill that out, and, you know, we can certainly help you kind of evaluate where you are and what next steps you have if you don't feel like, you know, you're getting kind of a vision here tonight, and, you know, you need a little bit more of handholding. We're here. That's my whole job, is to help schools kind of develop visions and to implement. So
last but not least, the safety stuff, right?
Yeah. So, and I know that we're getting close to time too. So I want to just talk quickly about, you know, Healthy Player One. So Healthy Player One is something that STS has developed kind of on the side, because we have recognized kind of a lot of the misconceptions and challenges that schools face. Basically, Healthy Player One is it's a software that runs on the computers that students are playing, and during gameplay, it acts as a referee, and during kind of practice play, it acts as like a health coach. So, you know, it will make students take breaks. It will ask them if they're feeling neck pain, back pain, eye strain, all different types of things like that. We've also implemented in version 2 things like why students should drink water, you know, different things along those lines, and why it's important to have a healthy diet as a gamer, because, you know, things like drinking water actually make you a better gamer because it makes your reflexes a lot faster. So I don't want to kind of stop here too much. If you're interested in learning more about Healthy Player One, certainly reach out and we can do a demo. We can send you a concept video. It's a really cool concept because I think what it's doing is it's helping kind of strengthen that duct tape that we're bonding esports and gaming and education, to make it a safer place and to make it more acceptable for community members, administrators, and teachers, you know, who may be championing for this. So with that, you know, STS really can help with everything that you would need for esports, anything from the desks to the chairs, to the curriculum, to the coaching. We're really here. We want to help you build your vision. This is everything that we do. Esports is a tiny piece of what STS does, but it's my whole job. So everything that I do on a daily basis revolves around esports here at STS. It's my passion. It's what I live for. I have a 5-month-old son of my own, and I hope one day that he matriculates into college with a full scholarship, because that would just be awesome. I want to leave it with some
Taryn,
questions.
I talk with my daughter about this sometimes. Role-playing games and online multiplayer games and things like that. There are going to be jobs for those in the future for non-player characters to have as actors. There will be ambassadors and people whose job is to welcome you into the metaverse, like it is to welcome you into Walmart. And not that that's like a high career aspiration or anything, but you know what I mean. Like this stuff is going to be realized in the next couple of decades, and we can help those kids get excited about that stuff now.
Right. Well, I want to open it up to questions, but I hope at the very least, you had a takeaway here tonight, whether it was a realization about a next step that you need to kind of take for your esports programs. And I'll put my email in the chat, or again, scan this QR code here and run through our esports assessment, and it comes directly to my inbox and I can reach out as well. But I will put my email. Oh, there you go. Thanks, Fran. You're faster than me. So, I wish you all the best of luck to be able to implement your esports programs. It's an incredible initiative. It's going to serve so many students. It's going to attract students back to school. It's going to serve students who don't participate in anything. So reach out if you need help, if you just need advice. We're here for sure to help. But best of luck and enjoy the rest of the symposium. What a great thing that the Riverside County Office of Ed is doing for you all here today.
Thank you very much for your time, everybody. If you fill out that form Taryn mentioned, we'll be on the other end of it, so you can get ahead of us. You can get a hold of us that way too. Thank you.